Hello, this is Cryptolyze. Hope you are doing well. This Monday, August 7, 2023, we meet today to talk about DOT, Polkadot's crypto, and we will also talk about KSM, which is the Canary Network. I'll explain it all to you. So a fundamental part, we come back to what Polkadot is, what DOT is, and then we attack the technical part to analyze the course of DOT. And the KSM course starts right away. Let's start by talking about Polkadot. So Polkadot, it's a blockchain project that's been around for a while already that has proven in its ability to develop because they recently released version 1. So that's the official stable version. So it was mid-July, if I don't have nonsense. And it's a big fulcrum for blockchain technology because Polkadot is a project that aims to be a zero layer, a layer that actually surrounds an ecosystem, which frames the ecosystem, exactly what we are seeing here, in which the whole ecosystem inside will be interconnected and interfaceable. Even all the smart contracts will be callable. What does that mean? It means that I can have a blockchain that is here, call a smart contract that is there, without asking myself questions about interoperability and how it works. This is the very principle, and this is what Polkadot wants to be, if only by name, Polkadot being a pattern of small dots. And this is precisely the principle. That is to say that we want it to be a pattern of small dots, and each small corner to be precisely a blockchain, and the whole to make a uniform fabric. And to achieve that, so there is a complexity, and it is one of the projects I think the most complex to set up in terms of blockchain development, in which they went into a reflection that is really very extensive in the design of the zero layer, with in particular a conceptualization. For each of the blocks, with the concept of relay chain, parathread, we will have the bridges. We will then have the collators, the validators, the nominators. And there are still some missing. There are the fishers. There are plenty of things that come into play. So each specificity will have its own function and will play in this complete ecosystem. So what is interesting to see above all is that they are the first to have really launched the concept of parachain. So who will really be the principle of having a blockchain, which will have an essential role in the ecosystem and which is going to have additional features. Thereupon it diversified a little bit. We have several other competitors who started to have that, but it's still Polkadot who launched this fashion with in particular the strength of the dowry compared to that. That is we must use the dot. We must stack the dot to be able to vote on the blockchain, which must have the parachain because there is not a set of parachains. Okay, so there are a few. And so it's always a community vote that determines which project will be entitled to its parachain and which allows you to interface, especially the one that has been the best known in the parachains. It is the one that mainly made it possible to have the possibility of having EVM applications, therefore Ethereum compatible on Polkadot. It was Moonriver and Moonbeam, which are actually the same protocol, except one was on KSM and the other is on DOT. So one was in the Canary test network and the other who is in Polkadot precisely to be able to talk about it. On the side, we have the explanation of what Polkadot is, in which we will have Rust here. So for security, we will have an overlay that will be carried out in Substrate, which will allow to having access precisely to Rust without having to code in Rust and C++. And then we will have Polkadot, so which will be the whole ecosystem which is built on Substrate, so which allows us to have all the advantages Rust, but much simpler, and WebAssembly much simpler. The principle of Polkadot in its development was really security and interoperability with, in particular, the XCM, so which will be Secure Cross-Chain Communication Standard, which allows precisely, as I explained to you, to interface with all the others blockchains that are in the Polkadot network, and even to call only on a smart contract that presents in another blockchain without worrying about anything. And this is really, for me, one of the projects that is interesting on this side. There are several other issues. One is a project that is very complicated to set up. Two, it's a project that doesn't necessarily have a very, very big ecosystem at the moment, whereas there is one, of course, which is still relatively developed, but which just doesn't manage to break through like the other ecosystems which have managed to develop much faster. So for me, it's really going to be the next bull run that will serve as a test for Polkadot. Are we able or not to be able to force the use of Polkadot on it, especially since we have a big inflation at the DOT level? We have a real usefulness of the DOT when we use it through the parachutes. I find the idea which is really pushed, especially with the one version where we find a new DAO governance system, which for me is very interesting as a concept. Therefore, we have a will to evolve on it. What we will have to see is whether yes or no, we are going to have strong decentralized applications which will be built on it, other blockchains which will be built on it with a real will to develop the Polkadot project. In any case, it will be a project to watch for the next bull run. It is one of the projects which, for me, brings one of the elements of solution for the concept of interoperability. Is this the right solution? This is the big question we will ask ourselves at the end of the next bull run. By finishing the fundamental part, we attack the technical part. At the level of the price, you will see that we are in a pattern which is relatively interesting with a very nice upward acceleration that we had. I'm just going to remove the logarithmic history to crush the course a little to see the different patterns. We see here the effective accumulation period, first acceleration with a buying climax which has been carried out, automatic rally, secondary test. So we find ourselves in a weekend reaccumulation because the secondary test, therefore the EST, has taken here the liquidity of the BC. So we are indeed in a reaccumulation of Wyckoff. And there currently we are in the sign of weakness, therefore, in the zone of long-term reaccumulation for precisely a crypto which is under construction and therefore which is awaiting its phase hatching. And so we are in this phase here. This phase, which is in the spot zone, so the exhibition zone, if you just want to enter this project or expose yourself to this project, if I have the concept, do your own research in relation to that. And technically, we are in this accumulation because the sign of weakness remains a wick-off accumulation to go back to the house, which is the very principle of reaccumulation and of being able to get a new ATH. So here we have two key levels. We have the first key level, which will really be the breakout that we had in May, June, and precisely July. So we still have here the break of 2022, and then we have the break here of FTX, but which was prolonged. The FTX break is always very long, and it's the same principle that we find here. We had Terra Luna Celsius, but we still had a wick, which fell further afterwards. Whereas at that time, we still had the other cryptos, which were growing. And that's also the principle of DOT and Polkadot. It's that we still have an ecosystem that hasn't yet made its relatively strong break-off structure. We made a small attempt here, but which for me is relatively low. We really need to manage to consolidate above and have a real close that takes place at least 2 candles to tell ourselves that we have really gotten out of the in and that we're going to accelerate again. For me, unfortunately, we are still in a scene of weakness. We will have to wait. We are still in something that is a little bit more positive than historical when we look before. But when we compare to the rest of the cryptos, we is in something that's a lot less ballsy than the rest. So for me, we are still in a phase of dilution. What is missing, as I told you, is an advent of the ecosystem, of the big flagship projects which are built on Polkadot and which precisely manage to attract a lot of users. And that is where we will see whether or not we will be able to do the handover, and that will be essential. We can clearly see that the RSI has still not passed above 50. We cannot consolidate above 50. Even we make a first inclusion, a second, and we cannot. So that proves that right now we are really in a bestiary pressure force that is in the process of carrying out, where we would potentially have here the SC, the STB. What we could expect is the spring in the surroundings, $3, $5, $3, $6, which corresponds here to the liquidity of this reaccumulation before the acceleration as well. So it would make perfect sense to me to have one last bearish acceleration before we can build an accumulation break, and a restructuring. And that's really important. You have to have a break of structure and a retest to tell yourself that we are potentially validating this accumulation. For me, we are still in a bearish breakout phase, which is quite logical. So there we will have to wait to have precisely this spring bullish break, row test, and then we can say that we have started to rise again. Technically, what can we set as a goal? So on that as an objective, we can stay in the habit being classic fractality heliotism with a big wave 1, a big wave 2, and therefore a big wave 3 for the next bull run, which would give as a target, it's simple, we take the Nashi figure retracement, we take the low point, we take the high point, and we retrace to the current equivalent, which gives us here a target of 2. I'm just going to put the 1.618, which finds around 89 minus $90 for DOT. On the other hand, that implies that we must have a really big ecosystem and have transactions, if not is not the case. We will not reach that level. That implies that we could potentially do an ATH, but that we will not be able to take off. So there we will have to really watch, especially when we pass the $23. I can assure you that we will have a sellout, which corresponds to the people who were blocked at the beginning 2022 with rates precisely at the dot level between $25 and $20. We will have a sellout, which will be carried out, therefore, an area of potentially reloading of shorts or even of TP, quite simply for the continuation. We'll move on to KSM. So Kasuma, which is primarily the Canary network, so implies Polkadot's test network. So very interesting, the same, we find a dynamic here, but this time of distribution, so which is much less bullish than DOT. When we compare the two, we can see that there is a valuation between the BC and the ST with an increase in highs. There we see that it is the opposite. We have the highs, which decrease well. So we are in a form of BC, Arkansas, ST, so distribution. Okay, so here we are in a distribution with a sign of fitness that is in progress, with a breakout, and unfortunately we are still in something that is currently much less bullish than Polkadot. This is to say, in relation to what I explained to you earlier, when we look here, we see that we are always making lower and lower batches and that we are not precisely managing to structure at the rise. The break of structure is at 69, the break of structure is at 49. So on that, we would have to have a second drop, have a box on the upside, a retest to tell ourselves that we are starting again. Here we are not at all in this type of pattern. We are rather in a bearish continuity, with always bearish continuities on low that are carried out. So that does not mean that we cannot go look here for a bullish retest, potentially here in the 33 before making bearish continuation, something like that, to make a bearish continuity, something that we find here. Well, we are still very far because unfortunately we are rather in a BTC, which is currently retracing. So we would be more in a bearish continuity to seek much lower levels and levels, which would potentially correspond to the $5. So really for me, a box on a very strong bearish for this reaccumulation before starting to rise again. So we would be fine with this approach. And in any case, we would have to wait. We would have to wait imperatively for a bullish break, something that is done like that with a rail that is carried out in retest, hop, and we leave. There we will have a signal to tell ourselves that we are potentially starting to rise again to look for targets that we will discuss later. The other point is that you really have to go back to the fundamental. What is Kasuma and its role in the Polkadot ecosystem? It remains a test network, certainly on a real scale. That is to say that it is real dollars that are used and that it is important to be able to test, but it remains next to a test network. What will happen when we have a massive Polkadot membership? Will we have a valuation of the KSM? Will we really have an interest in owning KSM? That is a question that is really very important. And it's the same if we ever have to project ourselves on prices. We could say that we will already seek above all the $200 to get this level of retracement, which corresponds to February 2022. Seeing a new ATH seems relatively complicated to me as it stands. In any case, it would really be necessary to enhance the ecosystem in addition by potentially including it completely in Polkadot, something that is not at the end of the day for the moment, in which we could have a valuation with the next ATH, but which would remain big prospects with still relatively significant risks. We have to be relatively careful about that and remember the role of this ecosystem in Polkadot, and that even if it were to merge, which is not the case at all, I don't think we would have such a strong valuation at the KSM level. He had come to separate himself completely, to cut off his funds. I'm not sure people would build on Kasuma instead of building on Polkadot. On that, it's up to you to tell me what you think in the comments. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, don't forget to leave me a little like. And we'll meet tomorrow at 7 for a new video, a daily news.